for inviting me to do this. Um, okay, for inviting me. And I think some of the ambassadors had a hand in this, and I really appreciate it. Two things that have been important to me, through my whole career. Even though I did work in traditional public schools for a long, long time, a lot of that was in alternative ed, and you're homeschool parents. And so you are alternatively educating your children. And that's really very important to me. And also making the education experience happier for kids, primarily teenagers, because that's who I work with, and their parents. So really think it's great that you're here. Just a couple things about me. You can read the slides. I think really kind of the worst way to teach is to read from a slideshow, but that's what I'm going to do. Hold on to your questions. You don't feel like you need to take a screenshot of anything, especially I get to one strategy later on. I'm going to be sending out information afterwards, both about what I do and some suggestions, and also from Oak Meadow. So again, just sort of, I'm going to ping pong around and just take what you can. So yeah, I've been a teacher for over 30 years, most of that time in public schools, and 8 years at Oak Meadow, some community college. And now I'm an independent academic coach for teens and young adults. I have some young college students as well. And I've always liked teaching history and social studies, which was my discipline, but I really love helping students learning strategies and helping them to enjoy school. As I wrote, Turn in Work Without Tears. You are the homeschool parent, so help you so they're not getting as many eye rolls, and help teenagers to advocate for themselves and to consider things maybe differently than they expect. Oops, wait a minute. Why am I not going forward? Shoot, sorry, first glitch. There we go. So I'm going to do a few things. One is take a look at your questions. We'll look at what some of you have sent already, give you a very basic kind of what executive function is. I am an executive function coach and use that in my teaching as well. I'm going to give you one strategy that I have used to deal with, well, not just boredom, but that was what prompted it. If you've ever heard of Kendra Adachi and her books and podcasts, The Lazy Genius, I'm a huge, huge fan, and I want to bring that sort of notion into what I'm talking about today. And then talk some more about, as an Oak Meadow independent user or enrolled parent, how you can get support from Oak Meadow. All right. So again, as Wendy said at the beginning, it's so hard to be a human, and it's hard to be a human parent and a human homeschool parent and a human homeschool parent of a teenager. It's so, so hard. So really, thank you for taking the time to be here. It says a lot. And even if you're watching this later on, you're taking the time to watch it later on. So, recognize yourself for what you're doing and for being here. So here are the questions, some of the questions, and I want you to invite you just to take a look and read through them, just to get an idea of what other people are thinking about. I imagine you're going to recognize a lot of this for yourself. And you're a homeschool parent, so you have the privilege and the joy and the challenge of being both the parent and the educator. As a teacher, I could be the brunt of a lot of, anger or distress or concern or challenge from parents, because you could blame it on the teacher, and a lot of times could be right. But you don't have anybody else unless you're enrolled, your student doesn't have anybody else to blame but you. And so you're in a precarious situation. And so I completely appreciate all of these things about not wanting to have a breakdown in communication with your kid, because nobody wants that. I have an adult daughter, so I did still going through the parenting thing, but you don't want to have a breakdown in communication ever, but especially if you are the primary teacher, because then it's a lose-lose situation. So I do appreciate where you're coming from, and these questions are super important. And I imagine, again, you're seeing a lot of the same things for yourself and in your families. Executive function, which is a huge topic right now, getting a lot of attention, as it should. I think it's really exciting and very interesting. And we need to have it for success. And there are all of the things, and this is going to be super quick, so there'll be time at the end to discuss it and also to follow up with me. If you're already well aware of executive functioning skills, just, listen a little bit. But executive functioning skills are all those things that we have to have and do in order to control our lives, to be the bosses of our lives, to get work done, to be effective, to be efficient, to maybe struggle a little less, to be at ease, all of these things. And we are not born knowing how to do these things, and they grow and develop over time. You may have heard that these skills are housed in the prefrontal cortex of our brains. You have probably heard, if you have teenagers, that it's used to be said that this is not fully developed till kids are 18, and then 22, and then 24. And I've heard as old as 28. And we can't wait till they're 28 years old to figure out how to, create a list of what their assignments are. So these things can be taught. So looking at the list, many of these things are going to connect back to the concerns you had and the questions you raised. Time management, response inhibition, working memory. I suggested my student do this, 10 minutes ago. Why have they forgotten? They're not just not listening to me. Well, maybe it's not that they're not listening to you. Maybe that their working memory can need some support. They're not persistent. Planning, right? We weren't born knowing how to do these things. And these things can be taught. And maybe if you're really good at these things, or maybe you're good at a lot of these things, consider where you learn them. How did you learn how to be an adult? How did you learn how to get through the day and pay your bills and, empty the dishwasher and be a parent and be a teacher and maybe be a spouse and a child? How did you learn how to do these things? And these are the things which is exciting for me, is learning more and more that these are specific, concrete things that can be taught to students that makes their school life so much better. It is not the same as ADHD. People with ADHD have executive function deficits, but it's not necessarily the same thing. So for example, working memory, if you're hugely stressed and you've got a million things going on and you've got to get the car in the shop and the kid to swim team and you've got all this stuff and you might forget something because you're under stress. It doesn't mean you have ADHD. It doesn't mean you have an executive function deficit. Just at that moment, you're struggling with that particular skill. Oops. Sorry. So looking at that again, just to think about, how did you learn how to do these things? So here's an example of things you probably do. You probably make a shopping list and go to the market. Maybe you choose to go when it's not as busy. Maybe you choose to leave early if you think there's going to be traffic. You go to the store and you want to, cook salmon and they don't have any fresh salmon. You don't probably lose your mind because they don't have the ingredients that you want, okay? Because you have learned response inhibition. And so then you pivot and you learn to make something else. Okay? Are teenagers losing their minds over things? It may not be hormonal, although it's, can be connected. It could be they don't have the skill to figure out how to not lose their minds. So the topic of this is how to help without looking like you're helping. I would like to throw out there that a great place to start is behind the scenes. I know that you're doing this already to a lesser or a larger degree. Get clear on your goals. What do you mean by helpful? And it's going to change over time, but what do you mean by it? What is a good grade to you? And why does it matter to you? What does independence mean? You're not on a typical school trajectory. So how much of that matters to you? There's so many options for, there's so many ways to skin a cat, pardon the expression, and how to get an education. And, alternative ed is one of them. Homeschooling is one of them. Get clear for yourself and knowing that it might change. I think it's an extra challenge to throw that on your student because they don't know. They're 13 or 15 or 17 or 19. They don't know. Okay. We'll come to the grade thing later about how to know what's a good grade, because that's pretty hard when you're homeschooling. So here's this Kendra Dachi that I can't say enough about to students and also parents. She has this book, The Lazy Genius Method, and a podcast, and she has a new book out. And I love the way she says, be a genius about the things that matter and lazy about the things that don't. I know, raising my daughter thinking, well, you can't do it all. Well, of course we can't do it all. She's not saying to let things go, because we can't let things go, but we can let some things go, and we can be really genius about others. And you can't do it all as a parent, or as a homeschool parent, or as a teacher, or as a college counselor. We can't do it all, but what can we be really genius about? And I don't think you need to share this with your kid. Okay, but think about this before you, kind of, I guess, say bring it to them. So what matters? What matters to you right now, this month, in whatever grade your student is? And you may have more than one student. What matters? Is it perseverance? Is it the content? Is it independence? A lot of you said, what does independence mean? Right? Is it that they sit down and do their math without being asked? Or is it, they ask you for help? What does that mean? My daughter's 25 and is super independent, but her car broke down and she called me. Well, okay, she's still independent, but I'm good with giving her a suggestion. And she actually took it. Do grades matter to getting into college? Due dates? I mean, being, on time for things. You're in a homeschool situation. How does that work? How to write, being able to ask questions. What matters to you today? And then be a genius about that. And the other stuff, maybe, you can put it to the side. You've got a long time to educate your child, and they're going to keep being educated after they're out of the house. So why start with the parent? Why start with us? Well, so we can teach skills and habits and strategies and provide context. Here's why you might want to know Algebra 1. We can't teach feelings. We can't teach dreams or desires. We can provide the experiences. We can demonstrate by our example. We can encourage the curiosity, but we can't teach those feelings. Think about something you feel strongly about. Can anybody teach you out of that? Probably not. But maybe they can give you a skill or a strategy that might change your feeling about whatever that is, good, bad, or otherwise. Our children, and I know you know this, but they're in charge of their own feelings and their dreams and their desires. I would suggest that you don't waste time trying to change their feelings about school. Okay? We can do what we can do, which is to teach and provide those strategies. And if we don't know what they are, then get help or support. If something's boring and they hate it, you're not going to be able to convince them that they don't. Give them a strategy to not have it be boring and not hate it. So here's an example. I'm using myself, Rebecca, as this example, but this is something that came up with a student I've been coaching, is boredom. So Rebecca, I know I'm reading from a slide, not the best way to educate, but I'm bored with history in this example. I don't think it connects with my life. I'm 15. I'd rather play with my dog. I'd rather be at swim team. I'd rather be with my friends. My parent or my teacher could not cajole me out of that. I was bored with it. And honestly, I'm a history teacher and I was bored with history in school. So don't bother to change their feelings about it. Teach them the skills to allow them to get through it. And maybe with some strategies and maybe with some different approaches, it will feel less boring and less miserable. And maybe even that Rebecca could find history to be worthwhile and then teach history for 30 years. You don't know. Another thing is, consider in this example, where boredom is coming from. Maybe it's not really boredom. They're teenagers. They may not have the language to explain really what's going on. Boring. This is boring. I hate this. This is stupid. This is boring. That's an easy out. It may be that they don't know what to do. It may be that, you've got a biology course book and that you have the entire year to do it. What's a task that you have to do, like, that you see that's going to be endless? I mean, think about, raising like little kids. It seems like it's never going to end. And, if we think it's never going to end, it's easy to feel like it's boring or it's frustrating or it's impossible or it's overwhelming. There's no end in sight. This is a little different if a student is in a traditional school, because the bell rings or the paper gets turned in or, grades are due, but you're in a unique situation. So is it boredom? Or maybe it's overwhelm or perfectionism? So here's some suggestions, some strategies. Look at the assignment. Maybe it is boring. And I'm going to give you an example of an Oak Meadow lesson that's boring. look at the directions. Maybe it's a lack of understanding or clarity. And then if not knowing how to do something can make something that's dull even duller. And try to make the lesson, if possible, more accessible to the student. Oops. All right, so in saying that some Oak Meadow lessons are boring, I choose one of my own. I wrote the American Government course. And so here's an example of something I do. I did somewhat when I was able to teaching Oak Meadow, but also as a coach. This is just one strategy. I have the student go through the lesson and circle any verb. Right? Not even have to read the whole thing. And it's a good little English lesson of what a verb is, right? But circle the verbs. What are the actions that they need to do in this assignment? And then underline the content without reading the chapter, without reading the whole lesson. Just look for the content. Okay, the nice thing about that is that often, even in a subject that's really unfamiliar to a student, they're going to recognize some of the content. Look for the numbers. I can't tell you how many times as an Oak Meadow teacher, I've had students be so frustrated because, like in this example, choose one of more of the amendments, and then there's choose one of these assignments. And I've had students turn in all three. Of course, they're overwhelmed and bored. Of course, because it seems horrible. So help them understand how to read a lesson. Just choose one. And also look at the vocabulary. And I think Oak Meadow is amazing. It's a wonderful curriculum. It's so rich. It's so stimulating. It gives so many opportunities for so much growth and experiential learning. It's also written for a high-level reader, and it's written for a teacher as well as a homeschool parent. And so the bottom, preface your question, I circled preface. I'm not sure at 13 years old I would know what that meant. It doesn't mean the curriculum's bad. It just means it's, it could be a heavy lift for a student. Other students, not a problem. But just, maybe if a student doesn't get it, it's not that they're bored and lazy. They really don't get it. And they don't know how to say that they don't get it. So I don't think this is the worst lesson out there, but I figured if I'm going to say something's boring, I'm going to use my own. So a couple other thoughts about helping. You may be doing this already. A conversation doesn't have to be verbal, right? There's a power dynamic when you're having a conversation, especially with somebody you love, especially when there's, especially a teenager. Write notes, leave a recording. It could be kind of fun. It removes any kind of confrontation. It's less obvious emotionally. Think about, if Wendy had said to me, Rebecca, give me a call because we have to talk about something, that's going to, what is it? Even if it's a really nice thing, but, writing is better, can be better, and recording can be better. It also reduces the possibility for an impulsive reaction. Whereas, you ask your student something, your kid something, and they're going to have a reaction. And maybe they don't want to be bugged at the time. Maybe you don't want to be bugged at the time. So it's just another thing that if you haven't considered, that it doesn't have to be face-to-face, it doesn't have to be verbal. I left sticky notes for my daughter. She would leave sticky notes for me. Just another way to kind of deflect the possible negative energy, because this is what you've asked me about, and you're home teaching your kids. You can't pass it off on to the public school because it's you. Okay. Now this might be, some of you might hate this. And if you, oops, sorry, wait a minute. Looks like I hit it. Some of you might hate this. And if you hate it and you think it's disingenuous or a fraud, then okay, but I'm just going to suggest this. Maybe you're doing this also. Give your words to somebody else. So for example, I say to my daughter, Wendy, I say, hey, Rebecca from my gym was talking about how her son probably would have gotten into this college if he'd done better in calculus. I don't know. Is that true? Did you hear that from KD? Okay, maybe I'm making it up completely, but it's a way to kind of get that information out. Okay, I'm not saying you should lie to your child, but there's a different way, kind of an easier way to be kind of strategic or sneaky. And you probably already know this and do this, but talking in the car is a great way to get a kid to open up, or on a dog walk when you're not face-to-face, maybe sitting together in front of a show. I heard a podcast today about boredom at work. Perfect timing, because I'm so bored of grading papers, and the podcast suggested. Now your teen might completely ignore you, or grunt, or eye roll, or just walk away. That's okay. You're planting a seed. You don't need a response. A response could lead to really good discussion, but you don't have to have a response. And even as long as it's not completely rude or egregious, a negative response means they're still listening. Okay. I recommend you be creative, be curious, sometimes give up arguing or being right. Sometimes the student's right. Bounce back. Don't make it heavier than it needs to be. And keep going back to, how did you learn how to be a student? How did you figure it out? There's another one, use an intermediary, even if it's kind of scripted. Nagging isn't nagging if it's not coming from a parent. Okay? It's a suggestion. It's an idea. It can be rejected. As I wrote, consider hiring an academic coach, because that's what I do. But it could be, someone else who's close to your kid, a grandparent. I can say exactly the same thing to a teenager that the parent has said, but it's not coming from the parent. It's coming from me. And so it's not nagging. You might be amazed at how anyhow. Many parents have said how helpful it is to have me as the intermediary, or it could be another academic coach or a relative, someone who's not the parent. And I guess I should step back and say, maybe not all of you are parents. Maybe some of you are grandparents or aunts and uncles who are the homeschool teacher, but it takes the emotion out. Okay? It's not nagging if it's coming from a parent. All right. So Oak Meadow curriculum, just a couple things about that. Oak Meadow curriculum, as I said, is amazing. It's so creative, and you can be self-guided, and it's flexible, individualized, and you can do, there's just so much. It's so rich. With that richness sometimes comes a lack of specific guidelines. You don't want your teenager to be, listening to a lecture like I'm doing and answering a true and false question. You don't want that for your teenager. So that's maybe one reason why you're at Oak Meadow. But with that, there's not specific guidelines, and that can be super, super hard. Super hard for teenagers, super hard for teenagers that have executive function stuff. What can you do? Okay. Look at the assignment. How would you know where to start and how to end? If you can't figure it out, they probably can't figure it out. There's a lot of open-ended questions, which are beautiful and rich and wonderful. I would say many teenagers are not ready to handle, or not ready to take those on without some guidelines. So close up those open-ended questions for them. Make it up. If it says, what are your feelings about the end of the Civil War? Well, that could be, one sentence, or it could be a 15-volume encyclopedia. So close it up. Say 15 words. Have them come up with it. Say, can you choose a number between 15 and 20? And it really doesn't matter, because you're getting at helping them to access that information. It's going to be a lot less boring to answer that open-ended question if you've got a goal. And then the student can say, oh, I did my 15 slides on the end of the Civil War, done. Okay, that's accessible. The open-ended questions are hard. They're beautiful and rich and wonderful, but they're hard to access. Remove the choices. Back in the boring government assignment, there were many choices. There were, I think, 3 choices for one. Well, take one away, or say, okay, Wendy, I think you should do B. And then Wendy, being Wendy, and a teenager, is going to say, no, I'm doing C. Okay, done. Okay. Or side with your kid. They don't know where to start. Look at it, say, you're right. I don't know where to start. Again, going back to that boredom, going back to those executive function skills, they're not just being bratty. They are being bratty in the way they talk to you about it, but they're not just being bratty. They don't know maybe how to do it. Not going to spend a lot of time on the whole carrot or stick. Want to just recognizing again that it's extra hard when you are the teacher and the parent. Okay. You want to be finding probably natural consequences. What you're in is an unnatural situation. Okay. Doesn't mean it's bad. It's just different. Okay. There's not going to be a report card that's going to come in that you can say, oh, Wendy, you didn't raise your grade in English, so you're in trouble. There's not maybe due dates. So look for those small wins. Go back to that executive function. What's missing? How can you shore those things up? Have those be the wins. Okay. And then, of course, give yourself and your teenager permission to fail, because, we all do all the time. Quick question, do I have to be organized to help my student be organized? Yes. You can get help if you need it, but yes. Right? Look at those executive function skills. What's a weakness for you? Time is a huge weakness for me. I'm terrible. I'm completely time blind. So I set my timers constantly, all the time. So we can have weaknesses, but we need to figure out how to deal with those so we can help our students. One little thing, get real about interruptions. Transitions are really hard for teenagers, especially with ADHD. Help them through examples of transitioning. And I just put the fun stuff there just as not to be judgmental or critical, because I think what you're doing is amazing and giving your students so many opportunities to do so many cool, rich things in their lives. I hear this from teenagers. We'll set up something they're going to do in coaching, and they're going to get this, do ABC. And I say, okay, I'm going to check in with you tomorrow to see if you did it. And it's not completely uncommon that the parent that, we're all set up. And then the parent, I say the next day, how did it go? And the circus came to town. So we went to the circus. That's amazing. That's wonderful. It's awesome. That's one reason why you're probably homeschooling, but be real about that and how that is going to affect the pace of how your teenager is thinking about school. Okay. Just something I've noticed as a coach. It's still go to the circus. That's just something I noticed, but to be real about that. Okay. So here's how Oak Meadow can help. And I'm going to wrap it up. And I hope I see on the chat, there's 12 comments. I hope they're not all saying, tell this woman to slow down and here's my question. But Oak Meadow can help. There's so many resources. If you're an enrolled parent, there's a humanities hub, which is amazing. And your student might have learned about it from their history teacher and then completely forgotten, but it is amazing. It is filled with resources about how to write a paper, how to do research, how to do good research. I mean, it's phenomenal. One of our teachers, Gabe Moss, created it, and it's amazing. So that's something you want to, and I don't know if independent users have access to that, but that's something if you're an enrolled user, find out about, because you can just send your student there. If you're enrolled, you've got your ed counselor, you've got Carrie, who's the school counselor, who's amazing. You've got teachers you can get support from. If you're an independent user, there is so much good stuff on the website. And so with the help of Wendy and Katie, and we'll have a list together for you, just to some quick things you can find that are based on what we've talked about today. The Gathering in the Meadows, hopefully we'll have more that are open to independent users, because really the school really values you. The Heart of Learning, and there's other books to guide you that are in the Oak Meadow bookstore. Living Education, which should be in italics or quotes, is a magazine that provides support a couple times a year to Oak Meadow families. I don't know how you feel about social media, but there's some great stuff from Oak Meadow. In the last year or so, Oak Meadow it's always been great with there's a sale coming up, which is good. You want to know when there's a sale, but there's more and more stuff on there about how to help your student and how to be a homeschool parent. And it's really great. So, I'm not trying to give Mark Zuckerberg more money, but it's really fantastic. And there are some really great social media, the Oak Meadow parent groups that can be helpful. So that QR code, it looks fuzzy. It does work. If you want to, get in touch with me, you can find me through Oak Meadow, but it's easier to use my coaching address. I was a full-time Oak Meadow teacher. I am not full-time anymore. I'm very, 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 very part-time. Everybody's happy about that. So, but I don't check the email as I used to. So get in touch with me about the resource list. If you have a follow-up question for me, because we're not going to be able to talk about everything today, if you're interested in working with me or finding out about that, I'll send an outline of the presentation with that strategy, with that boring government lesson, is something if you want to try. So that's available. And then, wait a minute, I had a slide that said, let's talk about it, but I guess I don't have it. So anyhow, with that, I will stop talking hopefully and let maybe Wendy and Katie and whoever else from Oak Meadow wants to do a little chatting. I'll have a sip of water and then let's see, what are you doing? What's working for you? How can we help each other? Because, my kid's grown up, but you're in it right now.
Rebecca, we had someone chat in, if it's okay if I read that now.
Yeah.
This is from Jeanette. She has a ninth grader who's struggling with a depth of response expected. He felt he was able to cruise most of the time in middle school, and now with the critical thinking as a component of his work, he's becoming frustrated. He'll
Mhm.
say things like, I don't know, I don't care, I don't want to think about that hard, or how is any of this relevant? He has ADHD, OCD, and Tourette syndrome, and he's never really learned to take notes and really resists the idea of trying. So she's feeling that this is a significant contributor to his struggle.
Mhm.
I don't know if there's anything that you have to say that could help her in any way. I think she was just kind of sharing some of her experience.
Yeah. Oh boy. Acknowledgement. Yeah, really, really, really hard situation. And yeah, I really appreciate the question. Again, sort of accessing the lesson, what's a way into the lesson? Maybe not look at something whole cloth, like, okay, well, what does a cell? Okay, do, little pieces of it. Critical thinking's hard. Give some access. Like, so what is that? How can a student access that? So again, like if you're what are, put a number in there, 3 reasons why, 5 reasons why, 7 words, ways to get into that, because the lessons are overwhelming and critical thinking's hard. And so, start with, I'm sure she's doing this, but start with small pieces and then it'll build. The best thing is to have a win, right? The best way to deflate the the negative and the resistance and the school refusal is to have a win and build from there. So that would be a very small suggestion to a very big concern. And also these things are developmental. And the going from, when I taught in regular ed, I taught ninth graders for like 25 years. It's a totally different, it's a developmental shift, and then shift from middle school to high school, and curriculum it's the real thing. So then you add all the other learning, challenges. It's for real.
Great. Thank you so much. Another question we have is, how do you suggest facilitating a child's accessing his full potential?
How do I suggest having a child access his full potential?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm accessing my full potential. Yeah, I think, I guess I would maybe throw it back on the parent. How did you access your full potential? How did that happen? And what are, when by full potential, is it, maybe I'm maybe reading into it that maybe the student could be doing better, but they're not. So by breaking down, looking at the lesson, seeing what the hiccups are, or what some of the gaps in sort of organization or understanding might be. Yeah, I don't think, we all think that we all can. I think, speaking for myself, I think I could be working harder. I always think that. And we think that about our kids, even the perfect kids, they could be doing more, they could be working harder, our spouse could be working harder, our boyfriend or our dog or whatever. But what is harder? What does that mean? So I guess, not to just throw it back on the parent, but what do those words mean to you? And knowing that it's also developmental. And other people should, I'm not the expert here. I guess I'm the expert, but other people should jump in too.
Jeanette, it looks like you have your hand up. You want to go ahead?
Uh, just as a follow-up to my comment is, I actually do sit down and read through his lessons with him, because he's always had uh, uh, motor planning issues. So we sit and we plan things and say, we're here, here's where you need to get, and here are the steps you're going to take to get there. And I don't know if it's a bit of sort of pathological demand avoidance, but he'll go and he'll say, "Well, I completed the assignment." And when the question, like say this, he takes has Gabe Moss for world
Mhm.
history,
Mhm.
and Gabe doesn't assign a lot of work, but the work he does assign, he wants details and he wants citations and he wants you to make your assertion and then back it up. There's no, hey, you're right or you're wrong about this, but tell me, thinking like he wants you to think like a historian. And I think that, my son is capable of doing this. He has consistently had really good grades, has performed really well, but he's sort of tapering off in his energy to do it. He doesn't want to, so
Mhm.
he's resisting. And I I felt the same way when I was in school. Uh, the struggle to do things you really don't want to do. Like it takes all your energy just to make yourself do it. And then doing it well kind of falls by the wayside. So he'll write 3 sentences when Gabe is looking for like a rich paragraph. And I'll go back and I'll say, well, you need more. You need to find these details. And he completely loses it. Like he's like, I did my
Mhm.
best. I can't do it. And I'm like, well, let's define your best here. And he's like, and he'll yell at me. And I'm just like, okay, I've never been here before. I can't work with you when you're raging at me. And so things just get put off. And so we're
Mhm.
in this sort of frozen stalemate on he knows how to do his work well. He just doesn't wanna. And I don't know how to
Yeah.
compete with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And because I said so is not, I mean, we can try it, but it doesn't, and it's another, I think about where we were when we were, 14, 15, whatever. I mean, it wouldn't really be developmentally appropriate for these teenagers to be thinking, long term. I mean, yeah, maybe your son might want to be, I want to get, straight A's so I can do this and do this and this, but they're really not capable of thinking that far out and usually and connecting that with their immediate action. So, I mean, there's always letting him do poorly. There's always that, and then maybe you're not the bad guy as much. And I think it could, and you sounds like you're probably doing this, but if Gabe says more details, well, just decide a number. Just say 7 details. And then your son's going to say, I don't want to do 7. And then you do 5. But yeah, there's not like really an answer. I don't know if other parents want to join in, but just to appreciate that you're in it, and he has the ability, so that ability will appear again. It might not appear in November, but if he has the ability, it'll come back, I think.
I might add a quick note there, just very briefly, which is that sometimes, and Rebecca's been talking about this, students need to hear something from a peer. And
Mhm.
so encouraging someone to go on to OM Awesome, which is a group for enrolled students, or to check in with a peer, regardless of what their teaching and learning situation is, and say, hey, do you get asked about this? What's the deal? Why is this so important?
Yeah. Yeah, that's really a really good point. And actually something I had wanted to mention is that, because you're homeschool parents, it's, your student isn't like sitting in the lunchroom in the cafeteria complaining about their history teacher, because even if it's Gabe, you're sort of their history teacher, right? And it doesn't do any good to complain about Gabe in your living room because he's not there, and your son doesn't have friends to complain about it with. And there's not that, like, you're walking down the hall and somebody says, oh, did you get that essay assignment? Because so I think, yeah, connecting with other students in OM Awesome, or, even if it's just, or, maybe sometimes teachers can make connections for kids so they can discuss it too. But yeah, you're kind of teaching in a vacuum, even if you have a teacher, and it's tough when there's not nobody else to kind of, prop you up, or to also be taking the hits.
And Rebecca, we have someone wondering if you have specific resources for teaching executive function skills to students.
You mean as a parent?
Yeah.
So there's tons and stuff tons of things out there on how to teach it. I think the first thing, really, it sounds kind of trite, but is awareness that, these are things that we are not born with, and that it can be taught, and that it could be, it might not be. I'm not saying your children aren't difficult and annoying and bratty and frustrating and all that. I'm not saying that doesn't happen and giving you the eye rolls and the cold shoulder. Yes, that happens. It also might be that they're missing that executive function skill. And so just to kind of reflect on, I can send some stuff, but just to look up executive function skills and look and see what those are, and think about how did you learn to make a shopping list? And if you're not, how are you going to the market and remembering what to buy? I don't know, but how did you learn how to do that? And how did you learn how to organize a paper? And, to look around and see, are there ways to address those that are not necessarily school, like the shopping list, like the, sneaking in a little thing about, oh, this is what, this is how this works for me, but not expecting them to do what you say, just to have them listen. And I can provide resources for that too.
It looks like we have someone who has a 13-year-old, 2E. I believe that means twice exceptional.
Yep.
Really despises both direct teaching and independent learning, and it sounds like most curriculum. So just maybe how to work with a student who's really digging their heels in.
Yeah, I'm also not a child psychologist. I'd say, Carrie, what do you think? I guess my first question, I guess I would ask, sort of not even as a sort of professional, like if we were just hanging out and talking. I see Lisa says that, like, how do you know that she's 2E? And where is she showing the exceptionalism? And then is there a way to, maybe focus on that, because she probably doesn't hate everything, but maybe she does hate the curriculum, and maybe it's not the curriculum, but I didn't say that. Or there's, or maybe parts of Oak Meadow, if you're an indie user, are great, but there's other things that might work better for, I've had students who, probably a lot of you parents have a combination of things. So, but there must be something that's making her exceptional. What do you think, Carrie?
Yeah, I think maybe you had mentioned giving like a little more autonomy and maybe giving them a chance to kind of go in the direction that they're wanting to go in, and making them a little bit more invested, using some of that extrinsic or intrinsic motivation, I should say.
Who's got a good solution that I'm sort of looking at the chat, but who's done something that they think might be helpful for the other parents?
Carolina, you can go ahead and unmute and just fire away.
One thing is, I got my own, I started a journal for myself and how I kind of perceive, like, as we work through the day. So every night I kind of journal my own frustrations and where I think I could improve and lean in to support them. And it's been very helpful for me. Like, I'm able to go back and kind of, if my son has a few therapists, and it helps even in, when I'm going over his IEP and things like that, just making sure that I myself am reflecting along with the work that I'm doing with him. So it's not a huge journal. It's literally like a little spiral, 99-cent notebook that I got. So, but it's been really helpful.
say one thing that I've found with as far as the boredom or resistance or sometimes is just having too much time. And I think there's definitely that whole, like, we want our kids to be bored because that's when they become creative. But there's also that, what's the fine line if a student has, 6 hours at home with their school books, that's a long time without, even if they're interacting and doing other things, it's a long time. And in their mind, it could be, this is forever. And so, I think it just, I don't know. I mean, I did say a few slides ago, maybe reduce some of the activities, but then add activities and really think about the course of the day. And I know, I see somebody had written in about who I know their kid's a pre-professional or super competitive athlete. And so my suggestion for them in getting their work done is, how do you fit it in, like in a small sliver? Because you only have this sliver of time. But I think most of us realize, like, if we have less time, we often get more done. If we've got tons of time, things expand to fit the time that we have. So I think that's awesome, Carolina, that you're reflecting on that. I think that's great. Yep. Hey, Dawson. Yep. Wish I should open up to see if I can see, how do I do this to see everybody?
If you go to the view top
Yep,
right, I
it.
think.
That's a big group. Yeah, I'm wondering, I mean, most people are off camera, but I'm just sort of wondering, a time timer, visual, yep, all these things. Yeah, all of these things are great. It's so also so individualized, right? Because my helping a student for figuring out how to get their work done in a small sliver of time is different from the student who, has too much time, is different from maybe some of you from the kid who's living on a boat. And like, yeah, that's amazing. But I can't just say, well, if you're tired of working at home, go to the library. That's kind of an impossibility. So, I haven't even gotten into the phone thing, which is its own other sticky wicket. But yeah, it's huge. And we want our students not to be on the phone all the time. However, whether they're at Oak Meadow or at public school or private school or college, wherever, they're being asked to do stuff using the internet as a resource. So you're telling me I'm supposed to look up the 3 causes of the Civil War on this website, but I'm not supposed to look at this YouTube about a cool car? I mean, we're asking something that's almost impossible. I don't have a solution to that. And it's going to be on you and if you're co-parenting to decide what's, how it matters and how it means, are you going to take that phone away and your kid won't like it, but maybe that's okay. But yeah, it's really hard. Yeah. Being rushed and overwhelmed when they're a full-time athlete. Yep. I know that well. Yeah. Yeah. And overwhelm. You want your student, I mean, all teachers in any school hopefully want their students to be happy learners, but you really want your student to be a happy learner because you're stuck with them at home teaching them. Oh, but I think it's to adapt the assignments. I don't know how homeschool, I don't know how you decide what to do, how much to do and how much to do, what to do and how much if you're a independent user. I really don't know. It must be really hard.
Rebecca, you have given us so many helpful tips here. It is a very individualized. I mean, I just start with that slide that you had all those questions that came from the RSVPs and what people are, it's so hard. And one thing might work for one family and one parent or one student, and something else, it's trial and error. And there are so many other factors, like you had mentioned, there's there's ADHD, there's perfectionism, there's being overwhelmed, there's different lifestyles and whatnot. So there's so much that goes in. Any great tip just to start or to get started, or places to search for resources?
Well, I just put my email in the chat. So if you want to email me, I'll send a list of some resources, back to you. Yeah, any place to start, I guess. I think maybe just to think about, I guess, go look at that list of the and there's many ways they write up executive functions. Like that's just one slideshow. You can find one slide, you can find it written, but it's basically the same thing. And think about how you learned how to do that stuff. And, and then maybe think about what your kid could, what they could learn, and how learning that might help, inhibition, control, like how to, we all have issues sometimes with not lashing out, right? But how to, how much of that is, they're not knowing how to control their feelings, and how much of they're just, they know, but they want to be a jerk.
And I also think podcasts and things like this, where you're talking with other parents, I mean, getting support and getting knowledge and just talking about the situation can be really helpful, as well as like I thought that was so true what you brought up, that, in a regular school system, students have the chance to talk with other students and get other perspectives and other, sometimes good, sometimes bad, advice from other students, but it's there. And so how do you help your homeschool student, talk to peers and get advice and strategies from peers? It's a good one. I think I'm going to have to go back and think how I learned all my executive functionings. I'm not sure how to really, you have to think hard about that, how to figure that out. It's going to take some thought. So, well, thank you. Anyone have a last minute question that they want to have Rebecca answer or have us follow up with? We really appreciate your time, and we do hope to have more of these where we're inviting both independent and enrolled families. So keep your eye out on those emails from Oak Meadow, and definitely share with us if you're looking for something specific.
Yeah. Thank you everybody for being here. I really, really appreciate the opportunity, and, shoot me an email if you have a question. And, I can speak as a coach, but also as someone who's, taught for my whole life practically. Also, something I've mentioned to Wendy, and I think Katie in the past has been thinking about maybe having I have done this before, some kind of like a study hall for students where they can get together and, be in a supportive, more strategic study hall where they can bring their work and they can, talk to each other, but also get some suggestions from me. Wouldn't really be tutoring so much because I know nothing about chemistry or, anything in the math field, but just a way to get together. And I think probably a lot of you are in homeschool co-ops, which can be good too. So, but I really, really appreciate it, and just keep doing what you're doing and showing up, and get in touch if you want to get some more information, and talk to Wendy and Katie and Carrie and whoever else is here from Oak Meadow. I don't know.
Thank you all. Shout out for you. This has been great. I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their November, and yeah, keep learning, keep being curious, and doing what you're doing. And we hope to be in touch. So take care all. Thank you so much.
Thanks everybody. And I can stay on for a minute if that's helpful, Wendy and Katie and Carrie.